Okay. The title of my paper is Non-Human Sentience and the Study of Das Zeitobjekt. And what I have intended to speak here is about the time as not simply as particle or simply as wave, or both, but in terms of philosophy, from Aristotle to Husserl via Brentano, how this element of time consciousness has changed itself, and this time as becoming object or Zeitobjekt is something which is fraught in Brentano's concept of time, and it is Husserl who actually effectively and historically provided kind of a closure to this concept of time, which Kant has regarded as transcendental. So where does Husserl and Brentano differs from Kant is first, the importance or primacy of presence of temporal object over the mere a priori presence of time in the absence of a temporal object, as Kant puts it. And secondly, of course, the reversal of epistemological directional reference in thinking of time. In Kant's transcendental aesthetics, the mere a priori form of time is applied to the object of a transcendental subject. In Brentano and Husserl, time philosophy, a time object, is admitted directly in consciousness from its mere givenness, something that Kant would deny. So the second slide is visible.
Yes, it is.
Okay, so the second slide is where I have tried explaining from the phenomenology of internal consciousness that something Husserl calls Abeloff Continuum, the running off of continuity of an enduring object is therefore a continuum whose phases are the continua of the running of modes belonging to the different time points, as I have pointed out, of the duration of object. If we proceed along the concrete continuity, we move forward in a process of constant modification. And in this process, the running of mode, that is, the running of continuity of time points in question, changes continuously. Since a new now is always entering on the scene, and the now changes into a past as it does so, the whole running of continuity of past belonging to the preceding point moves downward uniformly into the depths of the past. In the diagram I made, we can see the continuous series of ordinates illustrates the running of mode of enduring object. They grow from A, one point, into a determinate extent, which has the last now at its final point. Then the series of running of modes that no longer include a now, that is, a now belonging to this duration, begins. The duration is no longer actually present, but past, and continually seeking deeper in the present. The diagram, therefore, gives a complete picture of the double continuity of running of mode. So there is this now here has become the now that. So that takes us to the third slide. So while in the case of a spatial object, their presence occurs in both to us both in immediate sensory perception and in their existence in the consciousness as self-evident, the presence of time object. This is where I have found Brentano has excelled by giving the example of melody, the symphonies. If you know about Beethoven's Adagio Sostenuto or Moonlight Sonata already, and then you hear it, or vice versa, if you hear it and then you read it, so where does the consciousness comes? Where is the positionality of time? When you are hearing it, you are perceiving it through your ears, through your brain, and other sensory organs. And when you are reading it, it was a visual and it comes as a knowledge. So which one is the present? So in case of the melody only, it is possible that the melody itself becomes the time object, defying the now that, and it is always a now. There is no moving from now to now that, rather we are always in now. So the presence object to be understood as a time object. So when you are hearing it for the first time, it is not simply a time object, or when you are reading it before or after, it becomes simply a time object. What is here is that it is forever existent. It is always now, rather than it will, and in case of music, it never becomes now that. In case of melody, it never becomes now that. And here, the aporicity of the time in the philosophy of threefold contextualization in a logical, psychological, and phenomenological sense, it remains as fixed. So, coming to the third slide, melody as time object. The intentional inexistence of a melody in the consciousness is built on the original association of its past with its actuality, that is that constant present and presence as a time object. It is present and it has its own presence. In other words, the now of the melody always transforms in its inexistence in consciousness into the original association, in which an instantaneous past of now is always associated with the present of now point of the melody. Each musical note in this way forms a consciousness. For instance, if you are playing Chopin's prelude, and even though it is not a spring, you are playing the prelude of spring, or if you are playing Vivaldi, and there are 4 seasons in Vivaldi, and if you are suppose this is a season of autumn, and you are hearing Vivaldi's piece, which is spring. So the melody of that spring of Vivaldi makes its extended presence of spring, even though it is now autumn, and that is why it becomes the time object. That is, even if you are not in spring, while you are hearing the spring, or where you are not in the time of the melody. For instance, if you are hearing Astoria, and you are seeing this the imaginative Dionysiac love and the Apollonian serenity following it, you are, even though you are not into it, even though you are not associated with it, you are still in the presence of the time object. So melody therefore becomes the time object, and therefore it did not involve the presence of a human, right? Human is no longer important when we are using the idea of melody as in itself. It exists in itself. Okay, so next slide takes us to the idea of presentification, which Husserl calls Vergewärtigung. in the steady transition of the impersonal consciousness of the present into the retentional consciousness with all shadowing Abastungen of the time object. Husserl sees the above question like phenomenological attempt, and what Ricœur is merely calling a retentional sinking of a time object cannot adequately explain the necessary coincidence between the flow and the persistence. Only Husserl's idea can make the presentification as a secondary memory. It creates a secondary memory, and here the static endurance of time or coincidentia oppositorum remains as in a scientific concept, and the geometrical formal structure of is superimposed on a time phenomena, which is basically the mechanical phenomena. If the present is a point now, then we will not be able to experience anything in the present, and consequently there cannot be a retention or a protension of a exist, the point now. For both retention, which forms an immediate and primary memory, and the protension, which alludes on expectation, presupposes an extended now as the present of our experience. The point now would be like a still image of a symphony that represent a frozen moment, which I have already told. In all participants, the conductor, the soprano, the bass, as well as the musical instrument and their players stand still, and we are not able to hear anything. So what are the findings that we have come across? The first finding is the post-humanist sense of retentional and protensional extension of present. That is, it does not need a human to act or react with the music to make its present felt. Secondly, second finding is melody with its center, which is outside the framework of Vartuvian time, the Renaissance idea of man creating the time for the society, or man as the center of the time, is removed by the presence of melody at the center. And the final point that we come across is instantaneously past now of a time object in its Zurkensken and Abaststutum, where each musical note in this way forms an extended presence of melody as a time object in the consciousness. So in the conclusion, we can say the aporias of time as expressed by Ricœur, from which phenomenology can hardly dissociate, clearly point to a failure of this order and hierarchy of the noetic and noematic structure of consciousness. Husserl's phenomenology is based on this, and the aporia of the coincidence between the flow and the staticity has the original contradiction between the statics and the dynamics as a base phenomena. The staticity of a dynamic phenomena is obviously a static endurance of a dynamic now point, which is Zeitpunkt in the time phenomena. But this aporia rises precisely in the admission of a time object, which has its own temporality in the consciousness that always flows. Starting from the aporia of the present, one can say that the time object admitted in the consciousness no longer submits to the flow of a noetically functioned temporal consciousness. Instead, what becomes is that music or melody becomes hyletical data, or thus hyletische Datum, which does not follow the hierarchical order, and it is beyond the noetic, noesis, and the noema. Thank you.